On a scorching rural road just outside Boston, a 10-year-old black girl stopped to help a millionaire whose car had broken down. She had braids in her hair, grease on her hands, and an emerald ring on her finger. He thought she was just a kid, until he saw that ring, the same one he gave to a child he was told had disappeared forever. What began as a chance encounter would unravel a billion-dollar secret, resurrect a buried past, and ignite a quiet revolution that would expose corruption at the highest levels. Because the girl he tried to forget had just become the one person who could bring his entire empire to its knees. The heat shimmered above the asphalt of the long country road in Maplewood, Massachusetts, as if the earth itself were trying to exhale. 10-year-old Amara Lewis squinted beneath her frizzy braids, the sun casting sharp shadows over the cracked pavement. Her backpack, patched and scuffed, bounced lightly against her shoulders as she walked the familiar path home from school, cutting through the weeds and gravel like she had 100 times before. Then she saw it, a sleek, deep red Mustang Shelby GT500, parked awkwardly on the roadside with its hood wide open like a wounded animal. The car looked completely out of place here, surrounded by tall oaks, rusted mailboxes, and the distant whir of cicadas. Beside it stood a man in a crisp navy suit, tapping his foot and barking into a phone with the kind of voice that expected things to obey. Even his shoes, shiny leather Oxfords, looked like they didn't belong on this road. "I don't care what it costs. I need a tow here now. I have a meeting with the governor in 2 hours," he snapped, glancing at his watch, a gold timepiece so pristine it nearly blinded Amara when it caught the sunlight. She hesitated. Aunt Clarice always told her not to talk to strangers, especially not white men in expensive clothes with tempers. But Uncle Roy had taught her something else too, how to listen to an engine. And the way the Mustang sat there coughing, smoke hood groaning, Amara could almost hear it calling out for help. She tugged gently at the hem of her oversized MIT t-shirt, one of Uncle Roy's old ones, and took a few steps toward the car. "Excuse me, sir." She called, her voice soft but firm. "Need help with your car?" The man turned, eyebrows raised in disbelief. For a moment, he just stared at her as if trying to figure out whether she was real. His frustration flickered into something between confusion and condescension. "That's very kind, sweetheart," he said, the way grown-ups talk when they think you don't understand a thing. "But this is a high-performance engine. I need a mechanic." Amara walked closer and dropped her backpack to the ground. "My Uncle Roy owns a garage," she said, unzipping the front pocket and pulling out a battered tin box filled with tools that didn't shine anymore. "Taught me everything. I'm not a mechanic, but I can take a look." Before he could object again, Amara was already leaning over the engine with a calm authority that silenced him mid-sentence. Her small fingers moved with confidence, brushing over pipes and belts like she knew them by name. "When did it start overheating?" she asked, not looking up. 40 minutes ago." "Then the whole thing just died," he muttered. "Smelled anything sweet like syrup?" she asked again. He blinked. "Yeah. How did you—" "Coolant's leaking," she interrupted, pointing to a small puddle forming beneath the car. "Cracked radiator hose. I can patch it long enough for you to get to town, but you'll need to refill your coolant. Otherwise the engine's gonna fry." She reached into her box and pulled out a roll of industrial-grade tape. It wasn't fancy, but Uncle Roy swore by it. As she worked, the man stared, his frustration fading into something far more complicated. Her hands moved like they were born for this. Every decision she made precise, confident, familiar. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Amara," she said. "Amara Lewis." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Jackson Hale." She shook it without flinching a little, grease smudging his cuff. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hale." Just then she reached up to push a few braids out of her eyes. That's when he saw it, the ring. It was too large for her finger, so it had been tied with beige thread to keep it from falling off. An emerald set in antique gold. Simple, but rare. But it wasn't the color or design that made Jackson Hale stop breathing for a second. It was the imperfection in the stone, a crescent-shaped inclusion that only one person would ever recognize. He had given that ring away 12 years ago. To a little girl at St. Mary's Haven Orphanage. A little girl with big brown eyes and a stubborn sense of wonder. A girl named Amara. His voice cracked. That ring, it's unusual. Amara looked down at her hand. It was my mom's, she said softly. Well, my adoptive mom, Danielle Lewis. She passed last year. His breath caught in his chest. She told me it was a symbol, that someone gave it to her as a promise. She said, one day I'd understand. He stared at her speechless. There she was standing barefoot in the heat grease on her cheek, brilliant as the sun and wearing the very ring he thought he'd lost forever. Amara closed the hood. That should do it. At least until Maplewood. He tried to thank her. Words failed. Then, remembering himself, he gestured to the passenger seat. Can I give you a ride home? Amara hesitated. You're not going to kidnap me or anything, right? He laughed. No, ma'am, I promise. She glanced at the Mustang, then shrugged. Okay. The ride was quiet at first. The Mustang purred again under her temporary fix, and Amara leaned back in the leather seat, watching fields blur by. You live around here? Jackson asked, trying to keep his voice even. With Aunt Clarice and Uncle Roy, she said. Since Mom died. Been here since I was 3. And before that, he asked carefully. Amara looked out the window. St. Mary's Haven, the orphanage. It closed down when I was little. Mom never liked to talk about it much. Jackson gripped the steering wheel tighter. St. Mary's Haven. It was real. Still etched in her memory, still in his past. As they pulled into a small driveway beside a 1-story house with peeling paint and a humming window AC unit, Amara grabbed her backpack. Thanks for the ride, she said. He hesitated, then pulled out a business card and handed it to her. If you ever need anything, Amara, anything at all, just call. She nodded, confused but polite. Okay, bye, Mr. Hale. As she walked toward the front steps, he watched the emerald on her finger glint in the sunlight. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. It's me. Find everything you can about Danielle Lewis. Adoption records, St. Mary's Haven. The ring. It's hers. What Amara didn't know, what no one knew, was that her chance encounter on a back road had just kicked open the door to a past filled with buried secrets, stolen futures, and a man trying to redeem the one promise he never kept. And the ring, it wasn't just a keepsake. It was the key to unlocking an empire built on silence. Jackson Hale sat in the driver's seat of his Mustang long after Amara had disappeared behind the screen door of the modest home. The sound of cicadas buzzed around him, but he barely noticed. His hands rested on the steering wheel, motionless. That ring. That girl. He remembered the day vividly 12 years ago. The orphanage had smelled of lemon disinfectant and damp wood. He'd been there on behalf of a charity project, writing off a donation for tax purposes. But what he hadn't expected was to sit on the floor with a curious 3-year-old girl who kept trying to fix his watch with her tiny fingers. She'd reminded him of his sister, of who he used to be before the money changed everything. So he gave her the ring. A promise, he'd said. I'll come back for you. But he never did. Not because he forgot, but because 2 weeks later, St. Mary's Haven was shuttered overnight. No press, no warning. Just a closed gate and a sign that read, Property of Hale Development Corporation. Now 12 years later, that ring had returned on the hand of the girl he abandoned. Jackson drove slowly back into the city, the once familiar roads of Maplewood, now feeling like a haunted map. When he reached his penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, he didn't pour a drink. He went straight to the vault in his study, pulled out an old file labeled St. Mary's Haven, and flipped through the documents he had locked away and tried to forget. Purchase contracts, legal waivers, a list of names children reassigned to foster homes. At the bottom, Danielle Lewis, temporary custody approved pending closure. Handwritten beside it, in red ink, special case, priority transfer, delayed. He didn't remember writing that note. But he remembered his father's voice, calm and transactional, the way he always was when making something disappear. Some of these kids are investments, his father had said. Not all talents are born into wealth. Sometimes we find them early. Cultivate them. Jackson had thought it was just a metaphor. An ugly one, but metaphor nonetheless. Now he wasn't so sure. He pulled out his phone. "Megan," he said to his assistant, "I need you to call in Ramirez. Now." Across town, Amara sat on the floor of the workshop behind her house. Knees crossed, tools spread out around her like a semicircle of metal pedals. The old cassette player she'd pulled from the junk pile last week was now playing a Marvin Gaye tape. The song warped at moments the ribbon loose, but she liked it that way. It felt more human. Uncle Roy stood in the doorway watching her in silence. "She's different," he said quietly. Aunt Clarice didn't look up from the dish she was drying in the kitchen. She always has been. She fixed a car a grown man couldn't figure out. "She fixed the heater last month too," Clarice replied. "And the neighbor's fridge. And the washing machine at the laundromat. All without being asked." Roy leaned against the doorframe. "It's like she feels the machines. Like she knows what they're saying." Clarice nodded slowly, just like her mother. That night, Amara lay in bed, the ring glowing faintly under the moonlight, slipping through the blinds. She turned it slowly on her finger, watching how the emerald caught the shadows. She had never taken it off. Diana had given it to her with tears in her eyes and the kind of weight in her voice that a child doesn't question but never forgets. "This ring is a promise," she had said. "It belonged to someone who once meant something. One day you'll know why it matters. Until then, never lose it." Amara hadn't. She tucked the ring under her shirt and rolled onto her side, unaware that across the city her name was being run through databases, her school records pulled, her mother's death investigated again. Unaware that a billionaire heir who had once forgotten her was now trying to remember everything. At sunrise, Jackson sat across from Ramirez in his private office. "What did you find?" he asked. The investigator opened a leather folder. Danielle Lewis was a nurse at St. Mary's. No criminal record, no immediate family, except an older sister, Clarice Williams, currently Amara's guardian. Danielle filed an adoption petition for Amara 3 days before the orphanage closed. But he flipped a page, the documents were flagged. They were never processed. Why? Ramirez hesitated. "There's a note here from a man named Randall Thorne. He was your father's legal advisor. The note says, 'Do not finalize adoption. Subject flagged for reassignment or removal. Pending review by H.H.' Jackson's stomach turned. H.H. wasn't a code. It was Howard Hale, his father. She wasn't just forgotten, Jackson whispered. She was erased. Ramirez nodded grimly. Danielle disappeared from the system right after that. The orphanage was sold to Hale Development. Public records show it became a construction site for 2 months. Then that project was canceled. Now it's part of the Horizon Towers expansion. That land is worth $50 million, Jackson muttered. Ramirez pulled out another folder. One more thing. Danielle's death last year, single car crash. No skid marks. Brakes cut. But it was ruled an accident. Jackson stood up, his blood cold. You think someone killed her? I think someone didn't want her talking. Silence. Then, slowly, Jackson said, "Find out everything you can about my father's involvement with St. Mary's. And keep it quiet. No digital traces, no calls from corporate phones. I don't want him catching wind of this." As Ramirez left, Jackson returned to the old photo he'd kept in the back of the file, a faded Polaroid of a 3-year-old girl in overalls, covered in grease, sitting cross-legged with a car carburetor in her lap, and the faintest smile on her face. He hadn't remembered her name until yesterday. But now he couldn't forget it if he tried. That girl was the key. And the ring he gave her was more than a token of guilt. It might just be the thread unraveling the empire his family built on silence. 3 days had passed since Amara helped the stranger fix his broken-down Mustang on the side of that sun-scorched road. 3 days that on the surface seemed ordinary. But deep inside, something had shifted. She still went to school, still helped Uncle Roy in the garage behind their house, still tinkered with broken radios and scribbled diagrams in her notebooks late into the night. But the encounter with Jackson Hale had left a mark. Like a hairline crack in a wall that only she could see, something was waiting to break through. That morning, while repairing a vintage radio from the 1950s, Amara heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She peered out from the garage window. A black SUV had pulled up to the curb. It wasn't local. The plates were unfamiliar, and so were the 2 men who stepped out. Suits, dark glasses, the kind of clean-cut professionalism that didn't belong in this rural town. One man checked his phone. The other looked directly at the garage. Amara instinctively stepped back and reached for her phone. "Uncle Roy," she whispered. "There are 2 men outside. They're watching the garage." "I'll be there in 5. Stay inside and lock the doors," came his steady reply. 10 minutes later, the familiar rumble of Roy's old truck rolled into the driveway. He stepped out without a word, taking one look at the SUV and heading straight for Amara. "They're here," he muttered. "You know them?" she asked. Roy gave a single nod, heavy with meaning. "Your mom always feared this day would come." He walked inside and opened a hidden drawer in the old cabinet. From it, he pulled a thick envelope sealed in waterproof plastic. On the front, written in faded ink, "Only open if someone from the Hale family comes looking." Roy turned to Amara. "You ready for the truth?" Her heart pounded, but she nodded. Part of her had always known that something about her story didn't quite fit. The ring, the whispers, the sense of being watched. She took the envelope from him with shaking hands. Inside were documents, a birth certificate, medical records, and a small USB drive hidden inside a velvet ring box. Roy plugged it into his laptop. A video began to play. Diana's face appeared on screen. Amara's mother. She looked tired, her eyes sunken, her skin pale, but there was fire in her voice. "If you're watching this baby, it means Roy kept his promise." She paused. "Amara, you're not just a bright little girl. You have a gift. One that powerful people want to exploit." Amara sat frozen. "I smuggled you out of the St. Mary's orphanage the night I learned about their real plans," Diana continued. "They weren't caring for children. They were studying them, testing them. You were their prize." She looked down, voice cracking. "I changed your name. Hid us. We lived in fear. But I knew one day you'd need to know who you are." Diana's voice softened. "The ring you wear, it's not just jewelry. It's a key. Inside is a device encoded with everything I discovered." Then a final whisper. "Find the truth, Amara. And don't let them hurt anyone else." Roy placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You're the only one who can finish what she started." Meanwhile, miles away in Boston, on the 52nd floor of Hale Tech's corporate tower, Jackson Hale stood at his office window, staring out at the city skyline. On his desk lay a photo, a zoomed-in image of Amara's hand, more precisely the emerald ring she wore, the ring he had given to a little girl 12 years ago. "I need to talk to you," he said as his father entered the room. Howard Hale's expression was unreadable. "You've been digging through old files," he said. "That's dangerous." "I found her," Jackson said quietly. "The girl from St. Mary's. She's alive." Howard stiffened. "You sure?" Jackson slid the photo across the table. "She helped me fix my car. The ring, It's unmistakable. Howard's eyes narrowed. Then you stay away. That program is buried. You mean Prometheus, Jackson replied. You bought that orphanage, shut it down, hid the records. You experimented on children. Howard scoffed. We developed talent. You think power comes from playing fair? Jackson clenched his fists. She deserves to know the truth. And you'd throw away everything for a girl with a wrench and a chip on her shoulder. Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. On the screen, a voice memo was recording. I already did. Back in their garage, Amara had removed the ring and was inspecting the gemstone closely. She noticed for the first time a tiny groove at its base. Carefully, she twisted it clockwise. Click. The top popped open. Inside was a sliver-thin data chip. Whatever secrets had been locked away 12 years ago were about to surface. And this time, Amara Johnson wasn't just a little girl from a quiet town. She was the storm coming to break everything open. Here is part 4, continuing directly from part 3, with seamless narrative flow and voiceover-friendly storytelling. Later that night, the house was quiet, too quiet. Amara sat on her bed, and the ring beside her, the data chip now plugged into Uncle Roy's old laptop. The screen glowed with files, dozens of them, each labeled with codes she didn't yet understand. P001A. Neurocog test logs, St. Mary's Batch 17 summary. Dr. H. Hale. Internal memos. She clicked on a video file first. A grainy black and white clip flickered to life, a room lined with machines' electrodes attached to the heads of children seated at desks, all no older than 5 or 6. Scientists in white coats walked between them, monitoring responses. At the far corner of the screen, the camera paused briefly on one girl, curly hair and pigtails, tiny fists clenched as she stared at a mechanical puzzle on the table. The file name read, Subject 17. Motor Aptitude Trial. It was her, Amara. She watched herself solve the puzzle on screen in under 30 seconds. Her heart pounded. There was more voice recordings, transcripts of medical reports, a file marked Project Prometheus, confidential. Inside were details of a covert program run by the Hale Foundation recruiting children from vulnerable backgrounds, especially orphans, and testing them for advanced cognitive abilities. Those who demonstrated above-average pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, or mechanical intuition were flagged as assets of interest. The report included statistics. Out of 320 children tested, 19 were selected for extended trials. Amara, Subject 17, was flagged as exceptional. She leaned back, overwhelmed. Her whole life, everything she knew, was part of an experiment. Not love, not chance, just data. From the hallway, she heard the creak of the floorboards. Uncle Roy stood at the door holding a phone. His face was pale. That reporter you spoke to, Marcus Hayes, he wants to meet. Tomorrow. Amara hesitated. Does he know? He's been investigating Prometheus for years. He said your files might be the final piece. Roy paused. He also said, someone's watching you. Your school. This house. Amara clenched her jaw. They won't stop. No, Roy said. But neither will we. The next morning they drove an hour into the city. A discreet cafe near South Station tucked between office towers was their meeting point. Marcus Hayes sat at the back, a tall black man in his 40s, with a leather satchel and eyes that had seen too much. He stood when Amara entered, offering a smile that felt more like reassurance than greeting. You're braver than I was at your age, he said, motioning to the seat across from him. They slid a flash drive across the table. These are the files, Roy said. From Diana's ring. Marcus plugged it into his tablet, his eyes scanning the folders. Then he froze. This proves everything. The funding trails, the experiments, the cover-ups. He looked up. This could bring down Hale Tech. Amara nodded steady. Then let's do it. Outside, across the street, a man in a gray sedan picked up his phone. She made contact with the journalist. Should we intervene? Inside Hale Tech's corporate office, Howard Hale received the call. His eyes darkened. Not yet. Let's see how far they get. Then we clean it all up. Later that afternoon, Jackson Hale arrived at the Southside Community Center. The place was crumbling, neglected, almost forgotten. But it was where Diana Johnson had once volunteered, where she taught free STEM workshops to underprivileged kids. Jackson walked past peeling posters until he found what he was looking for. A file stuffed in a drawer marked Johnson Diana. Volunteer records, inside photos, sign-in sheets, and a letter. A handwritten letter addressed to him. Jackson, if you ever find this, it means I trusted you once. I hope I wasn't wrong. He held the paper like it might burn him. His hands trembled. He didn't see the man in the hoodie watching him from the next room. Back in her garage, Amara had started working again. Not to escape, but to focus. She dismantled a broken 3D printer Roy had found in the trash. With every screw, she turned every circuit she repaired. Her breathing steadied. Roy caught himself. Sorry, I mean Amara. She looked up. I read the rest of the file, she said. There are others. Kids like me. He nodded. They kept it hidden, but you're not alone. Amara turned back to the machine. Then we find them. That night, as storm clouds rolled in over Massachusetts, Marcus Hayes hit publish on his article. The Prometheus Project inside the secret program to weaponize children. Attached were the files Amara had recovered. The story exploded. Within hours, it had gone viral, picked up by local news, then national. Hashtags trended. Comment sections overflowed. Whistleblowers began contacting Marcus. Inside Hale Tech headquarters, chaos erupted. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Investors panicked. Employees resigned. But at the top, Howard Hale made one last call to a fixer. She has the files. She's talking to the press. Shut it down. Whatever it takes. The fixer only asked one question. Do you want it clean or permanent? Howard didn't hesitate. Permanent. Here is part 5, continuing the narrative with seamless flow and cinematic storytelling. The street light outside Amara's house flickered once. Then again. Then went out completely. Roy looked up from the couch, his instincts suddenly alert. He turned off the TV and walked to the front window. In the distance, a black SUV sat parked, engine running, no lights on. He didn't recognize it. And in their neighborhood, everybody knew everybody's car. He stepped into the hallway, knocking gently on Amara's door. She was at her desk, modifying a pair of old Bluetooth headphones into a private listening device for Marcus. She didn't even flinch when he entered. We've got company, Roy said quietly. The kind that doesn't blink. Amara rose slowly. How long? Maybe 10 minutes. From the top of her closet, she pulled out a black hard-shell case. Inside was a burner phone, 2 flash drives, a watch fitted with a GPS chip, and something she had built in secret, a tiny palm-sized device with a single glowing diode. Roy raised an eyebrow. What's that? Insurance, she replied. It transmits my coordinates every 60 seconds to a secure cloud server. You built that. She looked up. We both know Diana didn't just teach me how to fix microwaves. He couldn't argue with that. Outside, the SUV's doors opened. 2 men stepped out. Black suits, no badges, earpieces in. Their movements were practiced. Government, corporate, it didn't matter. They weren't here to talk. Roy grabbed the keys off the hook. We're leaving. Back door quiet. I'll loop us through the old textile yard they'll never follow. But when they reached the alley, a second car was waiting. Split, Amara said immediately. We'll meet at the warehouse in Roxbury. Roy hesitated. You sure? I've got what they're looking for, she said. They won't touch you if I'm not with you. Kid, go. She turned and disappeared down the alley as Roy took off in the opposite direction. Back in the neighborhood, the 2 agents entered the house. Empty. The laptop was gone. The drives gone. Just a mess of scattered notes and a half-sipped cup of tea. Targets in the wind, one muttered. Then we bring the net tighter. Meanwhile, Amara crouched between dumpsters behind a shuttered laundromat. She slipped out her burner phone and typed a quick text. Code black, activated, meet ASAP. Then she opened the second phone. The emergency one. The one Marcus had given her just in case. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said. They're watching my apartment too. Get to the safe house. Building 23C, 3rd floor. I'll meet you there. How much did you publish? Not all of it. Just enough to make Hailtech bleed. You should have waited. You gave the world the truth, Marcus replied. Now we just have to survive it. At the top floor of a brownstone in downtown Boston, Victoria Hale paced her office, seething. Her father's empire was cracking under the weight of its secrets, and the girl that girl had become a symbol. Why didn't you tell me she had the ring? Victoria hissed into her phone. A voice crackled on the other end. We thought the ring was lost when the nurse disappeared. We didn't know the girl survived. Victoria turned to the wall of news clips. Amara's photo, captured mid-sentence during a protest outside a Hailtech lab, was now plastered across headlines. Teen whistleblower uncovers secret program. Child prodigy versus corporate giant. The girl with the emerald ring. She's become a brand, Victoria murmured. She's become a problem, the voice said. And problems get erased. Victoria's eyes narrowed. No, not this one. Not until we know how much she knows. And if she knows everything. Victoria looked again at the ring. Then we negotiate, or we destroy her. In the safe house, Amara finally had a moment to breathe. The place was old, but secure, lined with blackout curtains, stocked with food, and encrypted Wi-Fi. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, his laptop already out, screens filled with data. They've deployed legal teams to half the media outlets in the city, he said. They're trying to sue the truth out of existence, and the files, spreading. I uploaded the unredacted set to 6 decentralized forums. Even if they shut one down, 10 more pop up. Amara nodded. Good. But even as she said it, her heart sank. Because it wasn't just about exposure anymore. This wasn't just a story, it was a war. And war had casualties. Her eyes moved to the far wall where a corkboard was now pinned with dozens of faces, other children flagged in the Prometheus files. Some adopted, some vanished. One in particular caught her attention, Kayla Ramirez. Subject 11. Photographic memory. Last seen 2012. Status unknown. She's still out there, Amara whispered. Marcus looked up. Then we find her. Outside in a darkened van 2 blocks away, a woman watched through binoculars. Blonde hair, military-bearing headset clicked in. This is Raven, she said quietly. Target located, standing by for orders. A pause on the line. Then a voice she knew well. Follow. Do not engage. Understood. Inside the safe house, Amara placed the emerald ring back on her finger. It no longer felt like a symbol of mystery. Now it was a weapon. And she was just learning how to wield it. The rain hit Roxbury like a warning. It came down in angry sheets, drenching the old brick warehouse where Amara and Marcus had set up their temporary command. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm churning inside Amara's mind. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the loft, staring at the encrypted drive she'd finally decrypted. The one her mother Diana had embedded inside the emerald ring. The room was dim lit, only by the soft glow of a single desk lamp. Her heart pounded. She hadn't opened the final folder yet. A password prompt stared back at her. 1 word, 8 letters. She took a shaky breath and typed it slowly. Marigold. The ring's engraving. Her mother's favorite flower. The last word Diana ever spoke before the accident. The files unlocked with a click. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a video appeared. Grainy, time-stamped 12 years ago. A dim hallway. A camera tilted toward a glass door. Inside, a much younger Diana Johnson sat in a small interview room holding a baby Amara. Opposite her sat a man Amara didn't recognize. Gray suit, thin tie, clean cut. but cold. This girl's reading patterns are off the charts, the man was saying. Her neural responses are years ahead of her age. She's not a lab rat, Diana snapped. She's a child. She's the property of Hale Tech. Read your contract nurse Johnson. Diana stood up, clutching baby Amara. Then I quit. You'll never get away, the man replied. You'll be hunted. Then I'll run. The screen flickered again, switching to surveillance footage, Diana sneaking out through a rear service door with a duffel bag. Baby carrier strapped to her chest. Another cut. 2 men in black jackets shouting into radios. Target is in motion. We have a breach. Amara slammed the laptop shut, her breath shallow. It wasn't just that her mother had saved her. She'd stolen her. Downstairs, Marcus paced the warehouse's lower level. He had just hung up with a contact at a Boston news station. They want a live interview. Tomorrow morning, he said as he walked back upstairs. They'll run your story without edits. Full hour. Amara was quiet. Marcus noticed the laptop shut. Her face pale. What did you find? She didn't adopt me, Marcus. He frowned. What do you mean? Amara looked at him, her eyes glazed with something ancient and bitter. I was born in Hale Tech's research program. I'm Project 17. They didn't just track me. They made me. Marcus sat slowly on the floor across from her. That doesn't define who you are. It explains why I am the way I am. No. That's what they want you to believe. That you're a result. A product. But your mother, she saw you as more than that. She saw a daughter. Silence. Thunder cracked in the distance. You don't have to do the interview, Marcus said softly. No, Amara said, standing. I do. Because they're not just after me. There were more. Project 11. Project 09. Kids with gifts they exploited. You want to name names? I want to name truth. Across town, in a secured downtown building under Hale Tech's control, Victoria Hale poured herself a drink. Her assistant entered soaked from the rain. She's going public tomorrow, he said. Live segment. Full immunity. Victoria's hands didn't shake, but her jaw clenched. She's more dangerous than her mother ever was. Should I inform your father? No. He's already made his mistake. I'll handle it. She turned to a black folder marked Raven OPS, then pulled out a photo of Amara from the day she fixed the Mustang. She wants to be a symbol, Victoria said, sipping her drink. Let's see how long she lasts under the weight of that crown. At sunrise, the city was waking up as Amara stood outside the news building, the emerald ring warm on her finger, like it knew what was coming. Across the street, Marcus adjusted his tie and held up his phone. Stream is ready. Global coverage. You nervous, he asked. Not for me. She looked up at the building, steel and glass reflecting the clouds. For the people who think this story ends quietly. Inside the studio, producers scrambled to prepare the set. But none of them knew that 2 miles away, a car had been wired to detonate on remote command. And the person holding the trigger wasn't a stranger. It was Raven. Perched in a nearby rooftop, she watched Amara through a scope, unmoving, waiting. Then her earpiece buzzed. Hold, said Victoria's voice. Not yet. We need her to speak first. Let the world see her. Raven frowned but obeyed. Then what she asked? Victoria's voice was cold. Then we silence her forever. The studio lights dimmed to a hush, and the red on air sign blinked to life. Amara sat on the set of WBC Boston, her legs crossed palms, resting gently on her knees. The emerald ring caught the light as cameras began to roll. Across from her sat journalist Leslie Wu, known for her calm demeanor, even in chaos. 5 seconds, the producer called out. Amara exhaled slowly. She wasn't here for herself. She was here for every child who never got to speak. We are live in 3, 2. A jingle played, then silence. Good morning, Boston. And good morning to our international viewers, Leslie began. With us today is Amara Johnson, the young girl whose chance encounter on a roadside is unraveling a corporate empire. The screen split with Amara's face on one side and a live chat feed pouring in from every corner of the country. Amara, Leslie said gently, "You've sparked a storm. Why speak now?" Amara's voice was steady. "Because I don't want to spend my life hiding. I've been tracked, manipulated, nearly silenced, and I'm only 15. A ripple of emotion moved through the control room. I grew up thinking I was just a kid with a knack for machines. But now I know I was part of something called Project Prometheus. My abilities weren't a gift. They were engineered, controlled, watched." Leslie leaned forward. "Engineered by Hailtech." There it was. The name dropped like a thunderclap. The chat exploded. Words like illegal experiments, cover-up child exploitation. "I'm not the only one," Amara continued. "There are others. Kids with photographic memory, emotional empaths, mathematicians who can see patterns in chaos. They were categorized, numbered, and one by one, discarded, or worse, and you have proof." Amara reached into her bag and pulled out the emerald ring. She pressed a small groove on the side, unlocking the hidden flash drive. She handed it to Leslie on air. "Everything is in here. Documents, footage, lab reports. It belonged to my mother, the woman who saved me. She died protecting these truths." Leslie looked at the ring, visibly shaken. This is going to change everything." Just then, in the production booth, a tech assistant frowned. "We're losing signal. Video feed just dropped in Asia. And now Paris." And the screen blinked. For 2 seconds, a black screen took over every monitor in the studio. Then a message appeared, white text on black. "Silence is survival." Then it was gone. In the control room, phones rang. Security buzzed. But Amara remained calm. She turned toward the nearest camera. "I'm not afraid of threats anymore," she said. "If you're watching this and you were part of Project Prometheus or know someone who was, you're not alone. You were never alone." Leslie turned to the camera too. "We'll continue this broadcast online. Unfiltered, commercial-free." As the segment faded to black for the television audience, the live stream stayed up and the viewership skyrocketed. On a rooftop 4 blocks away, Raven kept her finger on the remote trigger. "She's done," she said into her comm. "Say the word." But Victoria Hale's voice didn't come through. Instead, another signal buzzed into Raven's earpiece. "Abort mission." She frowned. "Repeat." "Victoria Hale has been detained by federal agents. Stand down." Raven froze. Below, unmarked SUVs were pulling up to Hailtech headquarters. Officers in black uniforms poured into the building. In handcuffs, surrounded by press, Victoria Hale was being read her rights. Andrew Whitaker stood beside the agents, jaw tight. "You lied to me," he said as she passed. "You lied to everyone." Victoria looked at him, chin high. "You were never built for this, Andrew. Sentiment makes you weak." "No," he replied. "It makes me human." At the warehouse in Roxbury, Marcus was on the phone with the Boston Globe's editor-in-chief. "Yes," he confirmed. She gave them the entire database. "This isn't just national, it's global." He turned as Amara walked in, face pale but triumphant. "You okay?" "I will be," she said. "But there's more. Project Prometheus wasn't just about kids." Marcus blinked. "What do you mean?" Amara held up the remaining pages from Diana's decrypted files. "They were developing tech that mimics our abilities, predictive AI, adaptive weaponry surveillance tools trained on gifted children. And they're already testing prototypes." Marcus's blood ran cold. "You're saying it's not over?" "It's just beginning." That night, news anchors across the world tried to explain what had happened. A teenager exposed a covert research project backed by billions. A major CEO arrested. Whistleblowers stepping forward. Politicians distancing themselves. But beneath all that, in the quiet corners of cities and towns, something else stirred. Children began coming forward. From foster homes. From shelters. from elite schools where their strange talents had always made them outcasts. They came not because they were afraid, but because they had hope. And at the center of it all, a girl with braids, an emerald ring, and a voice no one could silence, no matter how powerful her enemies had once been. Here is part 8 of the story, seamlessly continuing in cinematic, emotionally grounded, and voiceover-ready English. The rain tapped gently against the glass windows of the newly christened Johnson Center for Future Intelligentsia, a sprawling converted tech complex in Roxbury that had once been one of Hailtech's underground testing sites. Now it had been reborn under Amara's name. The original facility had been stripped bare of its dark past, windowless observation chambers, transformed into classrooms with soft lights and calming colors. What had once been sterile experimentation rooms were now open, creative labs, with murals painted by the very children who now walked the halls freely. Amara stood in the main atrium with Andrew Marcus and Uncle Leon beside her. She stared up at the carved words above the entryway, now engraved in reclaimed steel. "We are not experiments. We are the future." Hundreds had gathered for the center's opening ceremony. Former Prometheus survivors, educators, therapists, engineers, mentors, and quietly officials from the Department of Education and Civil Rights. The energy was sacred and fragile. Amara stepped up to the podium. No press, no spotlight glare, just her. Her voice was quiet but carried through every heart in the room. "I've been asked a lot of questions this past week. About power, about justice, about whether I regret telling the truth." She paused, letting the quiet settle. "I don't. I regret only that I didn't speak sooner, that others had to suffer in silence longer than I did. But I also know this: we weren't just targeted because of our abilities. We were targeted because no one expected kids like us, kids from foster homes, from the wrong zip codes with the wrong skin color, to fight back." The audience sat in a stunned hush. "But we did. We are. And this," she gestured to the walls around them, "is just the beginning." Applause broke like thunder. But Amara's face remained composed, almost solemn. After the ceremony, she slipped away to the rooftop garden. Boston glimmered in the dusk below, quiet like it was holding its breath. Andrew found her there minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," she replied, "once the rest of them are safe." He sat down on the bench beside her. "They're coming, you know. The others. The ones who've been hiding. We've gotten 137 messages from kids in the last 2 days. Some from cities. Some from small towns I've never even heard of." Amara nodded. "I want them all to know. We see them now." Behind them, Marcus stepped out, holding his phone. "You need to hear this." He hit play. It was a voicemail, a girl's voice trembling. "My name is Anais. I'm in Ohio. I saw your broadcast. I think I have what you had. My foster parents don't believe me. But I see electricity. I mean, I literally see it. In walls, in wires. I want to come to your school. Please." Amara blinked away a tear. Andrew gently took the phone. "We'll get her here," he said. "No," Amara replied. "I will." Over the next 6 months, the Johnson Center became a sanctuary. Children arrived by bus, by train, by whisper network. Some were 10, others were 17. Most had never met anyone who believed them. Now, for the first time, they were believed. And more, they were seen. Each child had a unique file, not categorized by threat levels or monetizable skills like Hailtech once did, but by creative potential, emotional sensitivity, learning styles, and personal dreams. The center's creed was simple: protect, heal, ignite. Former Hailtech employees who had come forward as whistleblowers volunteered their time teaching engineering neurobiology ethics. Even Victoria Whitaker Howard's estranged daughter, and now a public ethics prosecutor, visited the center to speak with students. "I carry the name that hurt you," she told them. "But I will spend the rest of my life helping to make sure it never happens again." Some children asked her hard questions Others refused to look at her. Victoria accepted them all, because healing was messy, but it was happening. One quiet evening, Amara returned to her mother's box of things still stored under her bed. She pulled out the final unopened envelope Diana had left, on the front, for when they are free. She opened it slowly. Inside a letter, and a key. Dear Amara, if you're reading this, then you've already done what I was never able to do, protect them all. I knew you would. You always saw what others missed. The key is to the vault beneath what used to be the church near Little Angels. You'll know what to do with what's inside. Amara's hands trembled. She showed the letter to Leon and Andrew the next morning. They drove to the church. It had been boarded up for years. In the old cellar, hidden behind rusted lockers and decaying hymnals, they found the vault. Inside a data bank. Files, footage, names. It was a full copy of the original Prometheus ledger, with one difference. Not just names of children experimented on, but names of officials, politicians, military contractors who had known and helped. This wasn't just a personal reckoning anymore. It was national. It was systemic. It was time. At the next press conference, Amara stood before the world once more, now not just as a survivor or a prodigy, but as a leader. And she wasn't alone. Beside her stood 10 other children from the center, each representing the next wave. Each proof that talent knows no race class or geography. It only needed light. As of today, Amara said we are launching a federal petition for a full investigation into all institutions connected to Project Prometheus. We're demanding accountability. But more than that, we're offering a model for what it means to nurture brilliance with ethics, with love, with truth. Reporters rushed to raise questions, but Amara stepped back because the microphone was passed to a boy with a stutter who now built his own coding language, to a deaf girl who had invented a new vibration-based communication system, to a once homeless teenager who could solve quantum mechanics problems in his sleep. The age of hiding was over, and a new one had begun. The headlines rippled across the country like a slow-rising tide. Whistleblower files revealed decades of secret testing on marginalized children. Survivor-led Institute sparks national investigation. From exploitation to empowerment, the children of Prometheus speak. Every major network picked it up. But it wasn't just media buzz. It was movement. Real seismic movement. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice opened a formal investigation into Hailtech and its shell companies. Grand juries were summoned. Subpoenas delivered. Retired board members tried to disappear behind gated communities and private security. But the ring had been turned, and the vault had been opened. Amara's mother, Diana, had archived everything, not only evidence of what had been done to the children, but also meticulous notes on who had signed off on it. Politicians, judges, even educators and religious figures. The web was wide and woven with years of silence. But now the silence was breaking. At the Johnson Center, Maya and her team worked around the clock. They didn't call themselves students anymore. They were architects, designers of the future. Each of them had taken on a project: sustainable micro-homes for displaced kids, accessible STEM kits for rural schools, AI models to detect bias in legal systems. The talents that once made them targets were now the foundation of an entirely new era of innovation. One afternoon, Amara stood beside a young girl named Bryn, blind since birth, but gifted in spatial mapping. The two of them tested a navigation headset Bryn had designed using echolocation and bone conduction. "This is going to change everything for kids like me," Bryn whispered. Amara smiled. "No, you are." Elsewhere, the reckoning was underway. Howard Whitaker, now convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, unlawful experimentation, and obstruction of justice, was transferred to a high-security federal prison. His last appeal had been denied. In his cell, he stared at the blank wall where his father's portrait had once hung in his mind, his legacy reduced to a footnote in a case study on systemic abuse. But for Amara, the mission wasn't vengeance. It was restoration, and the work was just beginning. She met with heads of nonprofits, policymakers, tech leaders. She testified before Congress, calmly recounting her story, backed by documents and living-proof children who once hid now standing in full light. When asked what she wanted from the federal government, Amara answered plainly, not compensation, not pity. Just this fund the future. Fund talent where you've historically overlooked it. Build centers, not cages. Build schools, not surveillance. And let us lead. Months passed, then a year, then 2. The Johnson Center model replicated across 9 cities from Oakland to Detroit to rural Georgia. Each center adapted to its community, but all followed one creed: nurture without control. Elevate without ownership. Amara, now 17, stepped into a new role, Director of National Outreach. She was no longer the youngest voice in the room. She was the one building rooms others had never been invited into. One evening, she visited her mother's old grave in the small cemetery behind the church where little angels once stood. She knelt, gently brushing away the petals that had fallen in the wind. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "I made sure they saw us." Behind her, the original emerald ring, now placed in a museum case at the center, had been replicated into dozens of smaller rings worn by mentors across the country. A symbol of protection, of resistance, of promise. Each one carried an inscription: "Let no child be forgotten." Meanwhile, in a quiet town in Oregon, a 13-year-old boy named Cale watched Amara speak on a live stream. He had always felt strange. His hands sparked when he got angry. Lights flickered when he concentrated. His foster parents said it was just behavioral. But tonight he saw her, saw himself. He packed a small bag, wrote a note, and walked down the dark road toward the highway. He didn't know where the Johnson Center was, but he knew it existed, and that was enough. Because now the world had changed, and for kids like him, the impossible had just become real. The second wave came quietly, not with protests or headlines, but with letters, thousands of them. Some handwritten in pencil by children in forgotten corners of America. Others typed in bold fonts from schools in Nigeria, Argentina, and South Korea. They all shared the same message: "I saw your story. I think I'm like them." Where can I go to be seen, too? By the end of that year, the Johnson Centers had received over 80,000 inquiries from young people across the globe. Kids who didn't fit inside boxes, who failed standardized tests, who were told they were too quiet, too strange, too intense. But now they were starting to realize they weren't broken. They were brilliant. And the world was finally listening. Amara stood at the gates of what used to be a military testing facility in Nevada. Now it bore a new name: the Prometheus Global Campus, a self-sustaining city of innovation built for and by former outliers. Underground tunnels powered by geothermal energy. Dormitories designed for neurodiverse living. Holographic classrooms with open-source curriculums written by mentors who had once been orphans, dropouts, runaways. It wasn't just a school. It was a declaration. On opening day, Maya Johnson, now 19, gave the keynote. She didn't speak from behind a podium. She stood among the students wearing jeans and a hoodie, holding the replica of the emerald ring her mother had once hidden for her. "I want you to remember something." She began, scanning their faces. "The world will still try to measure you with the wrong ruler. You'll scare people who've never had to stretch that far. But don't ever let them convince you that your light is too much. Shine anyway. Shine especially." Tears flowed freely that day, from teachers, from former skeptics, even from some of the security guards who had once worked under Hailtech's dark regime. A new era had begun, and this time, the ones in charge were the ones once left behind. Meanwhile, across the globe, reforms sparked by Maya's exposure of Hailtech had taken root. In South Africa, a bill passed protecting gifted youth from unauthorized testing. In Brazil, the government partnered with local organizations to launch creative learning hubs in the favelas. In the U.S. Congress passed the Child Potential Equity Act, reallocating billions into underfunded schools, mandating mentorship programs for all children flagged as at risk. Maya sat before the UN General Assembly on the 3rd anniversary of the first Johnson Center. Her presence caused waves. She was still just a teenager, but one who had reshaped global policy. A delegate asked, "What should we call children like you?" She replied gently, "Call us what we are, visionaries. Not anomalies, not cases, just kids who finally got the right soil." The hall erupted in applause, but behind the spotlight, life remained deeply personal for Maya. She often visited the grave of Diana, planting sunflowers around the headstone each spring. She stayed close to Leon and Renee, who now taught mechanics at the center, their workshop open to any student who preferred tools to textbooks. And she kept writing essays, stories, letters to kids who felt like she once did, invisible, unheard, brilliant, in ways the world had no vocabulary for yet. One of her letters read, "To whoever's reading this, if you feel like you were born into a story, already halfway told, rewrite it. Flip the page. You're not late. You're just getting started." 5 years later, the Johnson Prometheus network stretched across 27 countries. Over 300,000 children had gone through its programs. Half now worked in research, public policy, environmental engineering, medical, robotics, space tech, neurodesign. The rest were teachers, poets, filmmakers, musicians, mechanics, building new worlds in every corner of the old one. At the entrance of the original center, now a historic landmark, a monument stood. A bronze girl holding a wrench in one hand and a broken chain in the other. The inscription read, "Every talent deserves freedom. Every story deserves justice." Maya walked past it quietly one morning on her way to a small workshop tucked behind the center. Inside sat a boy named Elijah, 11 years old. His fingers disassembled a drone while his eyes scanned blueprints on the wall. He looked up when she entered. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I was stuck on the motor calibration, but I think I got it." Maya knelt beside him, smiling. "Let me see." As they worked together side by side, she felt the hum of something more than wires and circuits, the hum of a world that had changed, not just because of her, but because she'd made space for others to rise too. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting golden light across the center. In her office, Maya wrote one last line in her notebook. "Revenge built nothing, but justice built everything." She closed the book, looked out the window, and whispered a quiet promise into the wind. "You didn't just fix a car, little girl. Oh, you rebuilt the world. And somewhere out there, on another forgotten road, another child began their own story.